The universe was vast, filled with thousands of planets, each home to different species. Some were peaceful, some were warriors, and some just wanted to be left alone. But one planet, the Ziphian homeworld, had always been known for its peace. The Ziphians were a gentle species. They had never known war. Their technology was advanced, but they used it only for peaceful purposes, helping others, exploring the universe, and living in harmony with nature. But all of that changed the day the Torvax arrived. The Torvax were a savage species, known for their brutal conquests across the galaxy. They had destroyed dozens of peaceful worlds, wiping out entire civilizations without hesitation. When the Ziphians first heard the news, they couldn't believe it. The Torvax were coming to their world, and they had no way to defend themselves. The Ziphians had never needed weapons before, never believed in fighting, and now they found themselves facing a nightmare they couldn't stop. In desperation, the Ziphians did what they had never done before. They sent a message for help. The message was simple but urgent. To any who hear this, we are the Ziphians, a peaceful people of planet Ziphia. We are under attack by the Torvax, a violent race bent on our destruction. We ask for help, for aid in defending our world. We cannot fight them alone. Please, hear our plea. The message was sent to every corner of the galaxy. They knew the chances of receiving help were slim. Most of the galactic powers were too far away, or too self-interested, to care about the Ziphians. But they had to try. They had to believe that someone, somewhere, would answer their call for help. Days passed. The Ziphians watched as the Torvax fleet grew closer, a storm of dark ships heading toward their peaceful homeworld. The sky above the planet began to turn dark with the shadows of the Torvax ships, and the Ziphians' fear grew. There was no time left. They had no army, no weapons, only their hope. Then, one day, a message arrived. The Ziphians could hardly believe their eyes when they saw the words. The message was from humanity. It read, "Help is on the way, but you will get more than you bargained for." The Ziphians were stunned. They had heard of humanity before, but they didn't know much about them. They were a relatively new force in the galaxy, but they had already gained a reputation for their strange ways. The Ziphians had heard that humanity was a species that valued peace, but also knew how to fight when needed. But this message was different from any help they had expected. The words felt cold, like a warning. More than you bargained for didn't sound like the help they were hoping for. Confusion and fear spread through the Ziphian council. What did this mean? Were the humans coming to help them, or were they about to face something worse than the Torvax? As the hours passed, the Ziphians anxiously waited. And then, on the edge of their system, they saw it. A fleet of ships appeared, unlike any ships they had ever seen before. The human fleet, led by the flagship Sovereign, arrived in full force. Captain Mara Blake stood on the command deck of the Sovereign, looking at the screen that displayed the Ziphian homeworld. The planet was beautiful, peaceful, yet it was about to face the firestorm of war. She had seen worlds fall before, and she knew what had to be done. The Ziphians had sent their plea for help, and humanity would answer. But it would not be the answer they expected. "Prepare the fleet," Captain Blake commanded. "We'll give them peace. The Torvax will never threaten this world again. But we do not negotiate with invaders. We destroy them." The human fleet was massive, hundreds of ships, each armed with weapons that could obliterate entire fleets in a single strike. The Ziphians had no idea what they were about to witness. As the ships of humanity moved into position around the Ziphian system, a broadcast was sent to the Ziphians, directly from Captain Blake herself. "This is Captain Mara Blake of the human fleet. We've received your call for help, and we are here. But understand this, humanity does not give mercy. We bring total war to those who threaten peace. The Torvax will fall, and we will ensure that your world will never face such a threat again. But make no mistake, the help we bring is not a simple rescue. It is the end of your enemies." The Ziphians were shaken. They had asked for help, but this wasn't the help they had imagined. The humans were not here to negotiate, not here to make deals. They were here for one reason: to destroy the Torvax and protect the Ziphian world at any cost. The Ziphian leaders had never seen such power. They had never known a species capable of such destruction. The fear that had gripped their hearts deepened. But they also knew something else. They had no choice but to accept this offer. They had no hope without the humans. The Torvax were coming, and without the humans, their peaceful world would be destroyed. "Prepare yourselves," the Ziphian leader said. "Humanity has come. We do not know what kind of help they will bring, but we must trust that it is the only hope we have left." The Ziphians had called for help, and now they would find out what kind of help humanity truly offered. The question was, would it be the salvation they had hoped for, or would the price of that salvation be higher than they ever imagined? As the human fleet prepared to strike, the Ziphians waited, nervous, uncertain, and full of fear. But one thing was certain: the war was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. The Ziphians could hardly believe what they were witnessing. The human fleet was enormous, far larger than anything they had ever seen. The ships shimmered in the darkness of space, each one a giant, brimming with advanced technology. The Ziphians had no weapons to defend themselves, no army to stand in the way of such a force. But the humans had arrived, and their message was clear: they were here to help. However, the Ziphians could not shake the sense that the help they had received was unlike anything they had expected. Captain Mara Blake stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, her hand steady on the controls. She was a seasoned leader, someone who had seen countless battles across the galaxy. Her mission was straightforward: protect the Ziphians and ensure the Torvax would never threaten another peaceful world again. But there was something different about this situation. The Ziphians were unlike any species she had ever encountered. Their peaceful nature was both their strength and their weakness. She could see the fear in their eyes through the transmissions they had sent. As the human fleet approached the Ziphian homeworld, Captain Blake knew the stakes were high. She had been given one order: to ensure the survival of the Ziphians. But how could she accomplish that without the Torvax realizing that humanity wasn't here for diplomacy? The Torvax needed to understand that their time of aggression was over. And that would require more than words. It would require action. "Begin preparations," Captain Blake ordered. "Let's show them what humanity is capable of." The human ships powered up, their engines glowing bright. The vast fleet moved in unison, a show of strength and unity. The Ziphians watched, their hearts heavy with uncertainty. They had hoped for an ally, someone who would sit down and discuss terms, someone who could convince the Torvax to leave their world in peace. But the humans weren't coming to talk. They were coming to act. The Ziphian leaders gathered in their council chambers, staring at the massive fleet on their screens. They could feel the tension in the air. The humans' message had been direct: help is on the way, but you will get more than you bargained for. What did that mean? Were the humans simply a tool to get rid of the Torvax, or was there something else at play here? "Should we stop them?" one of the Ziphian leaders asked, his voice filled with doubt. "This is not what we asked for. We wanted peace." "But we didn't ask for the Torvax to destroy us either," another leader replied, her voice trembling. "We need their help. We have no choice." The room fell silent. The weight of their decision pressed down on them. There was no turning back now. They had sent the call for help, and humanity had responded. Whether it was the help they wanted or not, they would have to accept it. As the human fleet closed in on Ziphian space, the Torvax were already preparing for their next strike. They had no idea that humanity had arrived. The Ziphians had no way of fighting back, and the Torvax thought their conquest of this peaceful world would be easy. But they were about to learn that the humans were a force unlike any they had ever faced. Captain Blake's voice echoed through the fleet's communication channels. "This is your last chance, Torvax. Leave this world and never return. If you do not, we will make sure you regret it." The Torvax, however, were not the type to back down. They had never been afraid of threats, and they had never backed off from a fight. They responded with a message of their own, full of defiance and mockery. "We will not be stopped. This world will fall like the others before it." Captain Blake did not flinch. So be it. The human fleet moved into position. It was then that the Ziphians truly understood the scale of the power the humans had at their disposal. The human ships were sleek, advanced, and precise. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to make a statement. The first strike came from the Sovereign, the flagship of the human fleet. A brilliant beam of energy shot out from its massive cannon, lighting up the dark void of space. It struck the leading Torvax ship with devastating force, tearing through its hull like paper. The explosion rocked the surrounding ships, sending debris scattering into space. The Torvax, stunned by the sudden onslaught, scrambled to react. But they were no match for the precision and efficiency of the human fleet. The human ships fired in perfect coordination, each shot landing exactly where it was needed. The Torvax fought back, but their weapons were no match for humanity's advanced technology. The Ziphians watched in awe as the battle unfolded before their eyes. They had never seen anything like it. The humans were ruthless, not in the way the Torvax were, but in their relentless pursuit of victory. There was no hesitation, no mercy in their actions. Every move was calculated, every shot designed to end the battle as quickly as possible. The Torvax were outmatched at every turn. "What have we done?" one of the Ziphian leaders whispered, her voice filled with fear. "This is not what we wanted. We asked for peace." But it was too late to stop now. The humans had arrived, and they were not here to negotiate. They were here to ensure that no one, not even the Torvax, could threaten a peaceful world again. The battle continued to rage. The human fleet moved with terrifying precision, each ship working together as if they were one. The Ziphians could only watch in silence, unsure of what to feel. Gratitude, fear, relief. They had called for help, and they had received it, but at what cost? Captain Blake's voice echoed again across the comms. "The Torvax have made their choice. Now it's time to make ours." The war had begun, and the Ziphians were caught in the middle. The battle had only just begun, and already the Ziphians could feel the weight of the human presence. The human fleet moved with an intensity that left the Ziphians in awe, their ships firing with precision and coordination, each shot fired with the purpose of overwhelming the Torvax. The Ziphians had never seen warfare like this, quick, efficient, and without hesitation. The Torvax, despite their aggressive nature, were caught off guard by the humans' swift and organized response. It was clear now. Humanity's concept of help was not one of negotiation, but of action. Captain Mara Blake stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, watching the unfolding battle. She had been through many campaigns, but this one felt different. She had been given a task to protect the Ziphians, but this was not a simple rescue mission. This was a statement. The Torvax needed to understand that they could no longer invade peaceful worlds without facing consequences. "Status report," Captain Blake asked, her voice calm, but filled with authority. "All systems are operational, Captain," came the response. "The Torvax fleet is beginning to falter. Their defenses are not holding up to our firepower." Blake nodded, satisfied with the progress, but fully aware that this battle was just one part of the larger picture. The Torvax might be retreating, but the war was far from over. She couldn't afford to let the Ziphians think that everything was over just because one battle had been won. This was about sending a clear message to the galaxy. The Ziphians had called for help, and humanity had answered, not with a promise of peace, but with the firm hand of those who would stop any threat before it could grow. On the surface of Ziphia, the Ziphian leaders were still reeling from the shock of what they had witnessed. They had sent a plea for help, expecting a peaceful resolution, perhaps with diplomacy and discussions. But now they watched as the Torvax struggled to keep their ground against the human fleet. The humans were not offering them negotiations. They were offering protection, but in a form the Ziphians had never imagined. "What are we to make of this?" one of the Ziphian council members asked, his voice trembling. "They are not asking for our consent. They are not negotiating. They are imposing their will on the Torvax." Another council member, a seasoned diplomat, spoke up, "And they are winning. The Torvax are retreating. But I fear the cost of this victory will be something we do not understand yet." The council room fell silent as the Ziphian leaders considered this. They had trusted humanity to come to their aid, but as they watched the battle unfold, they wondered if they had made a mistake. Was this what they had wanted? The Torvax were being driven back, yes, but at what price? The Ziphians had never seen this kind of force before. It was clear that the humans were capable of great power, but the Ziphians were not sure they were ready for the responsibility that came with such power. Back in space, the human fleet continued to press on, their strategy clear. They were not content with simply defeating the Torvax in battle. Their goal was to end the threat completely. Each ship moved with purpose, not just to defend the Ziphians, but to ensure that no enemy would ever dare to threaten this peaceful world again. The Torvax, despite their aggression, were unprepared for such a show of force. Humanity's tactics were precise and calculated, each move designed to prevent the Torvax from regrouping or recovering. The Ziphian leaders watched, their eyes glued to the screens. The battle seemed to unfold in slow motion, the vast expanse of space filled with the light from the ships and the explosions as the Torvax tried to fight back. Yet there was something unsettling about the way the humans fought. It wasn't just about victory, it was about domination. "We did not ask for this," one of the Ziphian leaders said softly. "We only asked for help." But another leader, who had been quiet up until now, spoke up. "Maybe we didn't ask for war, but this is the only way to ensure our survival. The Torvax would have destroyed us. At least we now know that humanity is a force that can protect us." The first leader frowned. "But at what cost? Look at the way they are fighting. The Torvax are already retreating. Is this really necessary?" There was no easy answer. The Ziphians had no choice but to accept humanity's help, but the consequences of that help were still unclear. The humans were not here to merely defend them. They were here to eliminate any future threat. The Ziphians had hoped for peace, but they were now witnessing a new reality, one in which survival meant something far more complicated than they had ever known. As the battle raged on, Captain Blake watched with focus. She had seen worlds fall to invaders before, but this situation felt different. The Ziphians were not like the others she had fought to protect. They were a peaceful species, and their fear was palpable. She understood their hesitation, their confusion, but she also knew that they needed to see the truth. The galaxy wasn't kind to the weak. Those who couldn't defend themselves were prey to the predators that roamed the stars. The Torvax were just one example of that, and humanity would not allow such threats to spread unchecked. "We have to ensure they know we won't stop until the threat is gone," Captain Blake said to her crew. "We aren't just here to protect them. We're here to show that peace requires strength. The Ziphians may not understand now, but they will." The human ships continued their operation, and the Torvax began to fall back, their fleet scattering into the void. It was a hard-fought battle, but the humans were not about to let up. Captain Blake's orders were clear. The Torvax were not to be allowed to regroup, not to escape, not to return. And with each victory, the Ziphians were left to wonder. Had they truly received the help they had asked for, or had they just opened the door to a new kind of world, one where power, not peace, ruled the stars? The battle was not over, and neither was the Ziphians' uncertain future. They had called for help, and humanity had answered. But at what price? The answer would come soon enough, but for now, all they could do was wait and watch as humanity's strength reshaped their destiny. The battle had raged on for hours, and the Torvax were retreating in disarray. The human fleet had moved in perfect coordination, their advanced tactics overwhelming the enemy forces. The sky over Zifia, once calm and clear, was now filled with the swirling shadows of ships and the bright flashes of energy from the ongoing conflict. Yet, despite the success of the human intervention, the Ziphians couldn't help but feel a growing unease. In the council chambers of Ziphia, the leaders watched the unfolding events with a mix of awe and anxiety. The sight of the Torvax retreating was a relief, but it was also a reminder of how powerless they were in the face of such overwhelming strength. The humans had come to their aid, but their methods were unlike anything the Ziphians had expected. "Is this really what we wanted?" one of the leaders asked, his voice filled with doubt. "We called for help, but this is not the peace we envisioned." Another leader, who had remained quiet for much of the conversation, finally spoke up. "Peace is not always gentle. Sometimes it comes through strength, through the willingness to protect what matters. Humanity has shown us that. They have given us a chance to survive, a chance to rebuild. But we must understand that survival, in this galaxy, requires more than just good intentions." The room fell silent as the Ziphians pondered this truth. They had always believed in peace, in diplomacy, in the hope that they could solve problems through understanding. But the reality of the universe was different. The Torvax had never come to the table for talks. They had never shown any interest in peace, and now humanity had come to ensure that such threats were wiped out, ensuring the Ziphians would never have to fear such invaders again. Outside, the human fleet was still in position, ready to act should the Torvax try to regroup. Captain Mara Blake stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, watching as the last of the enemy ships retreated into deep space. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The Torvax might be retreating for now, but Captain Blake knew that this victory, while important, was only a small piece of a much larger puzzle. "We've driven them back," she said, her voice steady as ever. "But this isn't the end. We need to secure the Ziphian system and ensure no one ever threatens them again. Prepare the fleet for further operations." Her officers nodded in agreement, each one understanding the gravity of her words. The Torvax might have been defeated today, but there were always others out there, other threats that lurked in the shadows of the galaxy. Humanity had to show that it was willing to protect those who could not protect themselves, and that meant going beyond just defending Ziphia. It meant ensuring that no threat would rise again. Back on Ziphia, the leaders were trying to make sense of the events that had unfolded. The humans had shown them a new way of thinking, one that was difficult to accept. The Ziphians had always been a peaceful people, using their advanced technology to explore the stars and help others. But now, they understood that peace could not be achieved without strength. The universe was full of dangers, and sometimes those dangers had to be confronted head-on. "We must find a way to thank them," one of the Ziphian leaders said. "Humanity has given us a chance to survive, to rebuild. But how do we repay that? How do we show them that we are not weak, that we are worthy of their protection?" Another leader sighed, his face filled with uncertainty. "Perhaps it is not about repaying them, but about understanding what they have shown us. They've taught us that survival requires more than just good intentions. It requires the ability to defend oneself, to stand up to those who would harm others. We cannot rely solely on others to protect us." As they discussed, a new transmission from Captain Blake arrived. "Ziphian leaders, we have completed the initial phase of the operation. The Torvax are no longer a threat. We will remain in orbit until we receive further orders. We have shown you what humanity is capable of, but the choice of what comes next is yours. You can choose to stand on your own, or you can continue to work with us to ensure that no threat ever rises again." The message left the Ziphians in silence. Captain Blake's words were clear, and they carried a weight that could not be ignored. Humanity had offered its protection, but the Ziphians had to decide whether they would accept that offer fully or take the path of independence, knowing that they would need to learn how to defend themselves. "I fear we are not ready for such responsibility," one leader said quietly. "We have never fought. Our people are not trained for battle." The others nodded. The Ziphians had lived for centuries in peace. They had built a society based on cooperation and understanding, not conflict. The very idea of war was foreign to them. They had never needed to raise an army to protect themselves from external threats. The arrival of humanity had shaken that worldview to its core. They had been forced to confront the harsh truth that in the galaxy, peace was fragile and could be easily shattered. "We are not ready," another leader agreed, "but perhaps we can learn. Humanity has shown us a path, one that may be difficult but necessary. We must decide if we are willing to walk it." On the bridge of the Sovereign, Captain Blake received word that the Torvik fleet had fully retreated. It was time to regroup and assess the situation. She knew the Xiphians had a tough choice ahead of them. And while humanity had offered them protection, it was clear that the future of the Xiphian people lay in their own hands. "Prepare the fleet for departure," Captain Blake ordered, her voice firm. "We've done what we came to do. The rest is up to them now." As the human ships began to pull away from Xiphia, the Xiphians watched, uncertain of what the future would hold. They had called for help and received it, but the cost of that help was still unclear. Humanity had shown them the power of strength, but now the Xiphians had to decide what kind of future they wanted to build. Would they remain the peaceful people they had always been, or would they learn to stand strong, to defend themselves, and to fight for their survival in a galaxy that would no longer offer them the luxury of peace? The choice was theirs, and it was a choice that would define their future. As the days passed, the atmosphere on Xiphia grew heavier. The Xiphians, once proud of their peaceful civilization, were now caught in a web of uncertainty. Their world had been saved by humanity, but the price of that salvation weighed heavily on their minds. The human fleet had departed, leaving behind only their message and the unspoken promise of future aid if needed. Yet the Xiphians couldn't shake the feeling that their reliance on the humans had left them vulnerable. They were no longer the masters of their own fate. They had allowed someone else to step in and protect them. In the days following the battle, the council met in private to discuss the future. The question on everyone's mind was simple. What now? The Torvaks had been driven away, but the galaxy was vast and unpredictable. Would the Xiphians remain dependent on others for protection, or would they rise to the challenge and learn how to defend themselves? "The humans have shown us great strength," one of the council members said, his voice heavy with doubt. "But we cannot rely on them forever. We cannot always expect others to fight our battles for us." "We have never needed to fight before," another leader replied, her voice soft but firm. "We have always believed that diplomacy and kindness would see us through. But now we know that there are forces out there that will never respond to peace. The humans have taught us this lesson, whether we wanted it or not." "But can we truly become like them?" a younger leader asked, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "Can we really take on the responsibility of defending our world, knowing what that might mean?" The room fell silent as the Xiphians pondered this question. The idea of war, of standing up to aggressors, was foreign to them. They had always believed in cooperation, in the idea that everyone could find common ground. But now they had been forced to confront a harsh reality. Not everyone in the galaxy was interested in peace, and when faced with aggression, peace could only be achieved through strength. Outside, the sky of Xiphia was as beautiful as ever, but the peaceful landscape could no longer hide the tension that simmered beneath the surface. The Xiphians knew that their world, once an untouched paradise, was now vulnerable. It had become a target in the eyes of others, and the next time danger approached, they would not be able to rely on humans to come to their rescue. Captain Mira Blake, though miles away, had a keen awareness of what was happening on Xiphia. She had seen this shift before. Civilizations that had relied on others for protection, only to be left in a fragile state when their protectors left. The choice the Xiphians faced now was not an easy one. They could either remain in their comfortable state, hoping that the galaxy would be kind, or they could take up the mantle of their own defense, which would require learning a whole new way of life. "Captain," her officer called from across the bridge, "we've received a communication from Xiphia. They request assistance." Blake raised an eyebrow, glancing over at the monitor. She had expected this. The Ziphians had been left with the knowledge of how fragile their world was. They were reaching out, but this was different from before. They were not asking for a quick fix. They were asking for guidance, for help in becoming strong enough to stand on their own. It was the first step in a new chapter for their people. "Put it through," Captain Blake ordered. The screen flickered, and the face of one of the Ziphian leaders appeared. He looked weary, but resolute. "Captain Blake," he said, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. We have thought long and hard about the choice before us. We cannot continue to live in fear, hoping that someone will protect us. We need to learn how to protect ourselves." Blake studied him closely, understanding the gravity of his words. This was not just a call for military aid. This was a plea for the tools, the knowledge, and the training to become self-sufficient. The Ziphians were not asking for a war, but for a means to defend their way of life without relying on others. "We're ready to help," Blake said, her voice calm but firm. "It won't be easy, and it will take time. But if you're committed to this, we'll guide you." The Ziphian leader nodded, a sense of determination in his eyes. "We are ready. We will learn. We must." Back on Ziphia, the council convened once more, but this time the tone was different. There was no fear in their discussions, no hesitation. They were ready to take the first steps toward rebuilding their world, toward learning the ways of strength. It would not be easy, but it was necessary. As the days turned into weeks, the Ziphians began their training. The humans didn't just teach them about weaponry or combat strategies. They taught them about resilience, about the importance of standing strong in the face of danger. They explained the realities of living in a galaxy filled with uncertainty, and how strength was often the key to peace. It was a hard lesson, but it was one the Ziphians were determined to learn. The humans, led by Captain Blake, provided the resources and the knowledge to help them rebuild. The Ziphians were taught how to strengthen their defenses, how to build fleets of their own, and how to protect their people from threats both known and unknown. It wasn't about becoming a warlike species. It was about ensuring that their way of life could survive, no matter what the galaxy threw at them. In time, the Ziphians began to see the value in their newfound strength. They still held on to their ideals of peace, but they understood now that peace didn't just come from avoiding conflict. It came from the ability to protect what mattered most. And as their world healed, as their fleets grew stronger, they realized that they had been given a gift. The gift of choice. The gift of survival. Captain Blake watched from afar, proud of the progress the Ziphians had made. She had known that their journey wouldn't be easy, but seeing them take control of their future was more rewarding than she had expected. The Ziphians were no longer a species dependent on others. They had become a force in their own right. But as Captain Blake looked out over the stars, she knew that the galaxy was still full of dangers. The Torvax had been defeated, but new threats would always arise, and humanity, along with the Ziphians, would need to be ready to face whatever came next. The galaxy was a vast, unpredictable place, and survival depended on strength. But now, the Ziphians understood that they didn't have to face it alone. They had the choice, and that choice had made all the difference. The months that followed were a time of great transformation for the Ziphians. What had once been a world defined by peaceful exploration and cooperation was slowly changing into a society built on resilience and preparedness. The Ziphians no longer lived in fear of the unknown. They had learned to stand tall, to defend their home, and to protect the ideals that had once seemed impossible to defend. They had taken the lessons taught by humanity and adapted them to their own way of life, blending strength with compassion, defense with diplomacy. But as their world evolved, so too did their understanding of what it meant to be truly independent. The lessons they had learned from Captain Blake and the human fleet had shown them a new path. One of the first steps was rebuilding their fleet, not just as a symbol of military power, but as a statement of unity. They weren't preparing for war, but they were preparing for the worst. And in doing so, they found that they could not only protect themselves, but also help others. The Ziphian government began to change. What had once been a council of idealists, focused on diplomacy and peaceful coexistence, was now a leadership group that valued not just negotiation, but preparation and readiness. The leaders had begun to see that, in a galaxy filled with both wonders and dangers, security was the foundation upon which peace could thrive. They worked closely with humans, learning not only military tactics, but also how to use their technology to defend their world. Captain Blake had become something of a mentor to the Ziphian leaders, offering them guidance not just in military matters, but in leadership, strategy, and the hard truths that came with protecting a society. Her visits to Ziphia became more frequent, but each time she came, it was with a new sense of pride in the progress the Ziphians had made. They were no longer the passive people they once were. They had become partners in their own destiny. One day, as Captain Blake stood on the surface of Ziphia, overlooking the city of Ithan, she saw a world transformed. Where once there had been uncertainty, now there was a quiet confidence. The streets were lined with people going about their daily lives, but there was something different about them now, a sense of purpose. The once bustling city had become a hub of activity, not just for trade and exploration, but for training, innovation, and collaboration. It was no longer just a place of peace, it was a place of potential. "How does it feel, Captain?" asked one of the Ziphian leaders, standing beside her. His name was Saren, and he had once been a staunch believer that peace could only come through nonviolence. But now he had come to understand that peace, while important, needed to be protected, and that protection required the strength to face any challenge head-on. "It feels like hope," Captain Blake replied, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "I see a world that is no longer afraid, no longer depending on others to save them. You've come a long way." Saren nodded, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We have, haven't we? But it's not just about surviving anymore. It's about thriving, about ensuring that our people can live in peace, not because we're weak, but because we're strong enough to defend what matters." The conversation shifted as they watched a group of Ziphians in the distance, training with new technology, working together as a team to overcome obstacles. It was a clear sign that they were evolving, growing into a society capable of standing tall on its own. But even as Ziphia flourished, there was still one last, lingering question that hung in the air. The question of whether or not the Ziphians were truly ready for the future that awaited them. They had learned the lessons of survival, but could they maintain their ideals while living in a galaxy that had shown them its darker side? The answer would not be clear for some time. There would always be new threats, new challenges, and new obstacles to overcome. But the Ziphians had learned something invaluable in their time of need. They had learned that survival was not just about protecting your world from danger. It was about preserving your way of life, your values, and your commitment to peace, even if that meant defending those ideals with strength. Captain Blake's mind wandered back to her first encounter with the Ziphians. At the time, they had been a people on the edge of destruction, with little idea of how to defend themselves. And now, they were a beacon of what could be achieved through unity and determination. She had come to them as a protector, but in the end, they had shown her something just as important: the strength to stand on their own. As she turned to leave, Saren spoke once more, his voice full of resolve. "We will not forget what you and your people have done for us, and we will not forget the lessons we've learned. We will protect our world, and we will stand beside you, should you ever need us." Captain Blake smiled, a quiet sense of pride swelling in her chest. "I have no doubt you'll make it," she said. "And if the day ever comes that you do need us, we'll be here." As the human fleet prepared to leave Ziphia's orbit, Captain Blake stood on the bridge of the Sovereign, gazing out at the planet below. Ziphia was no longer just a world in need of protection. It was a world that could protect itself. The Ziphians had come a long way, and the galaxy now knew that they were not to be underestimated. The future of Ziphia was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they were ready to face it. They had taken their place among the stars, not just as survivors, but as protectors. And as the human ships moved toward the distant stars, Captain Blake couldn't help but feel that, in the end, humanity had not just saved a world. They had helped it rise to greatness. The galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, but now Xiphia had a place in it, a place where strength and peace coexisted, where the desire to protect what mattered was shared by all. And for Captain Blake, that was the most important thing of all.